Welcome to Leadership Where It Matters Most. The family is the most important institution in the world. The future of the church passes through the family. The church has the greatest mission of any organization ever. Go and make disciples of all nations. The family and the church. This is where leadership matters most. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Leadership Where It Matters Most. Today's guest is Dr. Janice Chik Breidenbach. Dr. Janice is an associate professor of philosophy at Ave Maria University. She holds a research affiliation as a member of the Aquinas Institute at Oxford University, where she was also the visiting research scholar in 2017 and 2019. She earned her master's in philosophy at the University of Texas and her doctorate in philosophy at the University of St. Andrews in the UK. Beyond philosophy, Janice is classically trained in violin, piano, and voice. She's performed in several orchestras, both collegiate and professional. She is married to the intellectual historian, Dr. Michael Breidenbach, with whom she has a son, Paul Thomas. I hope to have Dr. Michael on the show soon. In today's episode, Janice and I talk about her personal journey to faith, which is hard to believe actually, but true. She came to faith, I believe, while at Princeton, and then eventually into the church, the Catholic Church. We talk about her love for music, her gratitude for pursuing both her musical talents as well as her academic interests. We talk about the philosophy and theology of motherhood. We talk about her passion for free speech, which goes much deeper than just the freedom to express yourself, which even we share with the entire animal kingdom. It's really more about the exchange of ideas and debate and higher conversations, those conversations that drive culture and society for that matter. And then we wrap up with kind of what's on the horizon for Dr. Janice. So great episode, meandering conversation. I think Dr. Janice might be one of the smartest human beings I've ever had the opportunity to speak with. So had to have my dictionary, thesaurus, Google ready at hand to make sense of all these wonderful insights and perspectives that she was dropping in this hour-long episode. So, hey, enjoy it. It's a great conversation, and we'll see you next time. So, Janice, I sent you a few questions ahead of time, but I'm actually going to begin with a question that I did not send. So I'm not putting you on the spot or anything, but I'm just curious how you respond to this one. So I want you to imagine that you're in Pope Paul VI Hall. Have you been in Pope Paul VI Hall in Vatican City?
The Aula.
Yep.
Yeah, the Aula.
So
yeah.
You've got 6,000 people there and you're center stage. Would you rather give a 1-hour lecture or perform a 1-hour concert?
I have to say it depends on the musical instrument we're talking about.
Violin.
Okay. I have to say, I used to be afraid of public speaking. You know, I mean, most Americans, I think, would put public speaking right up there. Is it like above death or something? In terms
what
of
you're
like
afraid
what
of?
people are afraid of. Yeah, I really would feel comfortable doing either, to be honest with you. Yeah. I mean, I was recently in Vienna, and it was a wonderful conference. It was called the Symposium Thomisticum, and the Dominicans in Vienna had a violin ready for me. It was a very old violin. I believe it was a copy of Amati. I would be very surprised if it was an actual Amati, but Amati, the famous violin maker, Italian. But it was a beautiful violin, and we ended up, in the evenings playing Bach, Strauss waltzes, of course, since we were in Vienna, and then Father Thomas Joseph White, pulled out his makeshift guitar masquerading as a banjo, which really didn't work, but I mean, obviously, these are professional musicians and professional academics. And so I was in great company. I mean, Fran O'Rourke, who's an eminent philosopher of Aristotle and Aquinas, and MacIntyre pulled out his guitar and performed Irish ballads. And we just had a great time. Wow. And I have to say, I can't really stack one of those activities higher than the other. We had a great time, sort of powwowing with philosophical, theological ideas. We all gave papers, but we also had a great time just performing for one another. And people like us feel like that's a gift from God. There's nothing else to say than, there's some kind of, superfluous cosmic force in the universe that, like offers it to you. And so, yeah, anyway, I mean, I'm not really answering your question. I'm deliberately saying like,
I don't know.
Can I do both?
Yeah, you're showing your appreciation for both. Absolutely, which is great. So this is what listeners know about you right now, that you're sort of proficient academically and also musically. But why don't you take a few minutes and just give us a little bit more background, maybe, your academic journey, things of faith, family, whatever you want to share, just to introduce us to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I don't know. I mean, I go back and forth about how normal my childhood was. I mean, from one angle, growing up in a Chinese immigrant household, where your dad is doing like pretty, I don't know, I would say like stereotypically, Asian things, like working as an engineer for Lockheed Martin. Like he did that his whole life, aeronautical sort of software, and he was really into computers. And my mom was a homemaker. Like she didn't work outside of the home for the most part. But another aspect in which I think it was kind of atypical was that both of my parents were artists. And I saw that that's what they really loved. Like my dad sang Chinese opera. My mom, is a Chinese opera teacher. Like, so she now currently teaches in the DC metropolitan area. She does a lot of dance. So that's really, I would say, her big strength. But she also sings. And when I was at Princeton, she and my dad both came and gave like a performance, to the Princeton community. And I decided I would pick up the erhu, which is the Chinese violin, and just like learn it for the sake of this performance. And so I was good enough at the erhu to kind of accompany my mom,
Wow.
at this performance. but so we were kind of like a family travel, like kind of a family troupe here. And that did have a profound impact on me, because I saw how much passion and love my parents had for the arts. And my dad had this job, which, okay, my dad is deceased, so I can, I guess, talk about him pretty freely. I mean, I will say I think my dad didn't love his job, as an engineer. He was really good at math and all that, but what he really loved was performance. And
Wow.
and he never got paid for that. I kind of grew up in this milieu, like seeing my parents as performing artists, and growing up, playing the violin, the piano. And then, of course, like I think there is a kind of utilitarian Asian side to a lot of immigrant families, where they're just like, you're not going to become a professional musician, surely, right? And so that was kind of like the boundary that was set for me, for better or for worse. I mean, I don't regret like not becoming a professional musician. I mean, I'm glad that I, was pushed more into the, your kind of standard, instead of going to conservatory, which I thought about doing, I went to Princeton and got like a kind of normal education, you could say, like the conventional sort of pre-law education at Princeton's. They now call it the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. Back then it was the Woodrow Wilson School. So of course they, deleted that. But yeah, I mean, I did that, and then music performance. And it was at Princeton that I began thinking more about my faith. I mean, I had grown up kind of, well, I mean, I like to call it sort of practical atheist, like a practical atheist, because I didn't really think like I needed to do anything, I mean, as a consequence of believing, in God, and as a consequence of believing in the Trinitarian God, which I did. I mean, I, had a Bible, and I always thought there was truth in the Bible, but that didn't mean anything for my life, really. There were no practical or moral consequences of that, really. And it was in college that, I had, I would say, like, pressure from both sides. Protestant friends who were saying, you need to go to church. You need to actually do something with your faith. And then Catholic friends, and all of these people, by the way, were musical. So it really through the musical community that God found me, right? And then the Catholics and the Princeton Orchestra would say, like, you should think about Catholicism. Have you ever thought about that? And it kind of reached a point in which I realized, like, I need to make a decision. Like, God is asking me to make a decision. And I would go to, Protestant worship services, and I just had this like bizarre existential, kind of crisis. I mean, there's no other word to describe it, but I just thought, why the heck are we congregating? Like, what is the point of this?
Yeah.
Like, I just didn't see the point of this form of congregation, to basically like drag yourself out of your dorm room and like whatever comfortable thing you were doing and go all the way to this church only to like listen to a sermon, and that was basically it.
Wow.
Like I didn't see the point of that. I mean, call me kind of misanthropic or something, but I just, I'm actually an ENTJ like you. I saw on your website that you're an ENTJ, and I don't know if you're like this, but I'm not like extroverted off the charts. I guess if I were, then I wouldn't be happy like just writing in isolation for long periods. But all the same, like I don't care for crowds. Like I don't like get stimulated off of like just being part of an assembly and being part of a big congregation. So it was when like my Catholic friends said, like we really have Jesus. Like Jesus really is here. I was just like, these people are either insane or they have the truth, right? I mean, it's like what Chesterton says, right, about Christ. It's, you're either like fools, right? You don't know like what you're saying, or you're like totally insane. You're mad people, right? Or maybe this is true. And if it's true, it's like the most audacious, ambitious theological claim ever, to say like, we congregate because Jesus is here.
Wow.
And if that were true, I said like, that makes sense. Okay, now I get it. Now I get why Jesus would say like, where two or more are gathered, there I am. So I think like, the audaciousness of, Catholicism and its claims were, enough to get my attention for sure, because I don't know. I mean, I had felt pretty bored with my faith life, which basically was practically non-existent, up to that point. And yeah, I do owe it to basically friendship. Like it's just ordinary friendship, people who got to know me in orchestra or in other like musical contexts. Like one great thing about being a musician is that you form bonds pretty quickly with people, and it's a beautiful thing. It can be a scary thing too, right? Because it's kind of based on an emotion, right? Like if you're really good at like playing quartets together, you could have like totally divergent theological and political positions, but it's like we share something, right? Like we get Schubert, like we get Mozart, like we get whatever Gershwin. So yeah, but there's something there that led to something much greater for me, and that's kind of like in a nutshell, like the way I would say my upbringing was kind of sowing the seeds. I think for my eventual conversion in my senior year in college at Princeton. I was baptized because I was too lazy to get baptized too. That's the kind of Protestant I was baptized, confirmed, and everything. Like received the Eucharist for the first time in the Princeton chapel. Yeah, I remember feeling like the priest was he was like the doctor, who is there to minister to precisely what I needed, like what I as body and soul needed. And I never had that experience before, and it was amazing. It was very profound. Yeah, I mean, I remain eternally grateful that I can even consider questions like, well, imagine being in the aula, right, of in Vatican City. It's like, really? Like, do I deserve to even think of myself as like taking up space there? I mean, but yeah, I mean, God called me, and thankfully he gave me the grace to respond. So that's kind of my story.
Oh, that's great. I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Now everybody knows a little bit more about you. I want to shift and we want to talk about the philosophy of motherhood.
Sure.
Which is something you speak about often, obviously. Now, what's interesting as one who's not, I mean, obviously I studied, but I am not an academic. And whenever you see this word philosophy, whenever it's put in front of another word, it somehow elevates this other word, like the philosophy of architecture or whatever. I don't know, right? Motherhood by nature, I don't think needs help to be elevated because it's just so important. But I mean, tell us, why philosophy of motherhood? Why is that even important?
Great question. I think, it's a funny pairing, isn't it? I know lots of women who love talking about, the experience of motherhood. It's something that struck me too when I became a mother. I like to joke I never had so many friends, as when I was having a baby, right? Because like it is like something so commonly felt, by women. It's like, something that you share once you do share it. And on the other hand, I think something that has always fascinated me is, the phenomenon of motherhood and other phenomena like it, which emphasize, well, I mean, let's, put it this way, like the aspects of us that are animal, that we share in common with the animals. And we do share in common with animals this power of procreation, this power of gestation. There's something, I think, ineliminably, as one of my friends put it, like vegetative. I mean, in the sense that when you are pregnant, and I'm describing this to you, right, as someone who's never going to get pregnant, but there's something kind of shockingly just like plant-like about about the way in which like you don't really have to do much to ensure the successful growth of a baby in the womb.
Yeah.
And so I think among lots of thinkers, I actually, like, most recently I'm thinking again about like Simone de Beauvoir, because like my friend Rachel Liu is like constantly writing about her, and I like Rachel's thoughts a lot. I mean, I know that she is self-conscious about being controversial, like in the Catholic world, but Rachel basically in this recent piece was saying like Simone de Beauvoir, is kind of right about something, and what she may be right about is the fact that gestation and fertility are kind of obstacles to women having some kind of political role to play in our world. And when you look at the passivity, the kind of the passiveness, and the kind of this vegetative aspect of being a mother, especially in this the phenomena of just of conception and gestation, and then even childbirth, right? Like you've got to like do something about this, otherwise, like that you're right. I mean, there comes a point at which like you just think like, I've got to get this baby out, right? Like, I mean, there's no sort of other way. Like some women like even describe feeling trapped at that point.
Right.
Like what did I do to get myself into this situation? How am I going to get out of it, right? But yeah, so I think all of these factors have made feminists, to various extents, think that maternity is not something that advances women politically anyway, much less economically. And I mean, in all the ways that men in a very active and actively political society want to say this is where you can make a difference, motherhood doesn't seem to make that kind of difference. There is a role here for thinking about animality and realizing that animality in us can actually be something active, can actually be something that is taken up into the spiritual, and if one prefers a non-theological framing of that, like a rational, right, something that's higher than other animal life, right? It gets taken up into this sphere, such that we can say that, I mean, I would say like we are philosophical animals. And so like anything else, there can be a philosophy of motherhood. Like, I mean, for one thing, like we should think about this thing, but it's also the fact that it's not, I don't think it's wholly passive. I mean, I think among feminists, certainly for Beauvoir, you get the sense that the only things that a woman can control are contraception and abortion. Like those are the active things, right?
Yeah, right.
But there's something about, the way in which we can accept our animality, right? The acceptance of that, just as we can also accept death. So like natality, mortality are like the two pillars, right, of our animal nature that like we can actually do something about. And hopefully I would say like, from our standpoint, like in a moral way, right? And that is sometimes like a kind of interior acceptance of what it means to be animal. Mortality being one of these hinges, and natality being the other. So these are like, slipshod thoughts, but, I mean, somehow like they hinge together. I've been reading a lot of Hannah Arendt over the years. Just recently, I started reading her in college, but like the human condition, for instance, like she has some really interesting thoughts here about natality, and what she says, actually, natality, that is, I mean, we could say like motherhood is a kind of central, she says it is the central category of the political, precisely because it's through motherhood, it's through natality and birth that action comes to be in the world. And so she has this whole emphasis on action as being that which creates the condition for remembrance, for history. And, animals don't have history, but we human beings do. And so that's like at minimum something that matters to us. And there's something about birth and in our capacity for birth. And mothers, of course, play a central role in this, that allows for the emergence of history in the world, allows for the emergence of political action. And I mean, really, like for her, this is, I think, the great political power that we have. And it's only through mothers that it comes about, really. So I think there's something deeply, missing from these accounts of, motherhood is just this passive thing. And that's why women are the second sex. That's the basic gist, right? Is we'll always be the second sex because of this limitation. Like women have this animal limitation, that makes us more passive in all of this. But I would say, and I'm following Aquinas here, there's something deeply powerful about the ways in which our spiritual dimension gets integrated with the animality, right? With our animal aspects. And you see this with all of the saints, right? Like the remembrance of our coming mortality, is in some ways like the greatest thing that we as spiritual animals can do. Saint Jerome with the skull,
Right.
sort of we're taking possession of death and not seeing it as something to be feared or unexpected in the way that I think the other animal world sees it.
This is fascinating stuff. Thank you for sharing. When you consider the motherhood and looking at it from different lenses, like philosophy of motherhood, how then is that distinct from a theology of motherhood?
That's a really important question. I think there's a lot of work being done in the philosophy of motherhood recently that, I don't know, I was talking to a really well-known philosopher recently who said he really does not care for a lot of the stuff that's coming out about, a lot of it is like, they call it the metaphysics of pregnancy, and they're interested in whether the baby in the womb is like a part of the mother or like an independent substance, And so all of these like sort of, I don't know, fine-grained metaphysical issues, I would say are, part of the current trend in the philosophy of motherhood. But there are other issues in the philosophy of motherhood that have been dealt with, like the issues that I've just brought up about the passivity versus the activity of motherhood in gestation, with people like Merleau-Ponty, for instance, saying that it's like totally like purely passive, and then others trying to carve out some space for the mother as a kind of artist. But all of these accounts eventually fall short of what it is for us to be co-creators with God in this act of gestation. Parenthood as something that, isn't just like like technical production. And I think a lot of people are treating it like, like that these days. I mean, what does it do to us, if we know that like our babies, our children are coming out about because of some, I don't know, like lab operation, I mean, some like test tube. I don't know. I mean, there's something I think that it does to us, the way that we understand life itself, the way that we understand our powers. I think like theology still has the last word here. And this is why I prefer to focus on the natural phenomenon of motherhood. I know that there are other ways these days. I know surrogacy, IVF, like, and we would say these are morally illicit ways, of begetting. But there's something about the naturalness and the spontaneity, the gratuitousness of life, in which, two people who fall in love, manifest their love. And that love then is manifested sort of literally besides themselves. Like I always remember like we only have one, it took us a long time to conceive, for who knows what reasons, and when our son was born, I remember how there was a kind of metaphysical absurdity to me about, the fact that like from two, we've become three. Once you have 8, I'm sure you're used to this, the fact of life, but there's somewhat, yeah. But, it doesn't really cease to be a miracle that within your body, within the woman's body, that God chooses to kind of mysteriously bring about, this new ensouled spiritual being. And I just love that, Catholics also love to add on even more beings by saying, oh, by the way, there's a guardian angel. Like
of course.
we're I think the Catholic religion is just, it's all about like abundance, right? It's like, let's get more, let's get intercessors and, let's get like angels and, like sort of on your team. And Yeah, I mean, I think there's just like our God is a God of abundant love, and like that abundance like shows itself in the proliferation of love.
Yeah.
That love manifests in this way. I think was it Chesterton who, or actually no, maybe it was like the biologist Haldane who said like, God must have an inordinate love of beetles or something. Like you just see that, like
It's
when
so
you see
many.
like all the
Yeah.
the so many varieties species of beetles. But yeah, I mean, the more the better. I
Yeah.
think that's like it's almost like that's the motto. And yeah, I mean, there's a kind of mystery there that is preserved in the naturalness of human love, the
Mm.
naturalness of the way that it's manifested and that it multiplies, and I find that very beautiful.
Mm.
And there's a theological truth here that is going to shed light too on the way we understand both natality and mortality, which is that ultimately, I mean, these things are not in our sphere of governance. They're not in our, we're
Mm.
not like totally autonomous
Yeah.
beings. Like we are ultimately dependent beings. And,
Yeah.
as a mother, like you don't, this, like no other truth becomes so evident to you than the moment like this helpless being is put into your arms, right? Like the
Mm.
helplessness of a newborn child, is astounding to us. And yet there's a strength there too.
Mm.
And there's a strength in the love that parents feel for this helpless being who, let's be honest, like doesn't reciprocate at all, any kind of gratitude for like,
Yeah.
and there's something deeply theological in that too. Yeah, the way in which we all rest in God. Yeah, I mean, it's very, very beautiful truth to me when I learned that the Islamic word, I think it has Hebraic origins too, but the word for God's mercy actually is rooted in the word womb
Oh, wow.
in Arabic. So
Yeah.
so yeah, that's very beautiful, right? And I think like you see this in the Hebraic texts and the midrashes. Like there's a definite linkage between like creation, God's love for His creation, and the mercy of the womb,
Mm.
the all encompassing kind of supportive, welcoming, hospitable, sort of space, the really like the home
Yeah.
that we provide as parents, but very particularly like in a mother's body.
Yeah.
And that continues to be the case right after birth. I mean, the mother's body I think is like the locus for
Mm.
the child in so many ways. And of course, they grow up and they separate and they, and it's good for them. And it tends to be like more, Edith Stein thought this, like it tends to be more like dads, fathers who are good at doing that, like
Mm-hmm.
sort of, encouraging like the exploration, the distance from the mother. And that is very necessary too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to tell my students there's a kind of like fission fusion pattern in human life that, yeah, you could also say is like, as theologians call it, the exodus redditus, like the going away from, coming back to
Yeah.
sort of pattern
Absolutely.
that we see as well in natality.
That's fascinating. I mean, one of the things, just as you're talking, Janice, is obviously there's just such a deep appreciation and awe, really, of what we're speaking about, motherhood, even if it's at the sort of animal level, which is also,
Yeah.
holy. But it just struck me, and again, this is another question that I didn't prepare you for, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are, sort of looking at more of the popular space, common culture, but maybe as an academic. Is there something out there right now that is almost like anti-motherhood, if you will?
Yeah, totally.
I won't mention the name because maybe that's taking it too far, but I saw on video some celebrity just riffing on her stance that, she doesn't want to have children and she doesn't understand why women would want to, and just this whole thing. And it was just so painful even to see, because I believe she was saying things that were authentically true to her. But it was just so opposite of the experience of the beauty that I've seen in motherhood and family life and everything else. But so anti-motherhood, like how would you define that? What is that in the world? Yeah. How do we understand that?
Well, I mean, I'll be very honest. I mean, I was, raised in a very secular milieu, and throughout public school, I was public school educated,
Mm.
and at Princeton, there's no signs of maternal life, right?
Right.
In a place like that, you better not exhibit any signs of it,
Oh,
right, or
wow.
any like
Yeah. Yeah.
desire. There's definitely a sense in which like you got to be ambitious, and career ambition simply means foreclosing on any thought of wanting to be a mother. And I mean, we're lucky, at Ave Maria University to be in a community where, people bring their kids, I mean, I've had speakers, come to my Philosophy of Motherhood class, like with their babies and like nursing their babies,
Wow.
while like talking to my class.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I figure like that's part of life. I mean, I just think like babies should be with their mothers, and moms who have been encouraged to do so know how to, handle their kids, right? Like in even professional contexts. But I've been yelled at, I've done like fellowships at, I won't mention like which, university, but it was an Ivy League university, and I was having a meeting, with another, with a colleague, and I brought my then 1-year-old, to the meeting, and I was kind of, people made comments, right, like, well, good luck with that, right,
Oh,
like good
wow.
luck with the, or like even or the most extreme was like, this building is not, child friendly or something like
Oh, my
that, as if
goodness.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't even know, right? Yeah, I will say this. Like, I think most minimally, like, people need to realize if you're someone who says, like, I never want to be a mom, or I never want to be a dad, I never want to have kids, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So there's actually a philosopher who has written a paper. Her name is L.A. Paul, and it's a great paper. Like, it's the paper is titled "What You Can't Expect When You're Expecting." And it's
Yeah.
basically, in philosophy we call this, it's an epistemological argument. So it's an argument about the limits of our knowledge with respect to experiences that we don't yet have. And for someone to say, I haven't experienced motherhood, but I can tell you
Right.
for sure
Right.
that I would not like it, is, she argues, irrational.
Yeah.
Is, not founded on any kind of, and there's another, so she has an extension of this argument in her book, Transformative Experiences, in which she, basically says, like, we should be open to the transformative experiences that may come our way that we have no idea. You just grow in virtues that you never expected. You didn't even know you had vices, right, until you had these kids. So yeah, I mean, I think there's some sense in which, simply from like the epistemological point of view, that is, like, from the limitations of our knowledge, no one really knows, can say, right, like anything, like I don't want to have that, I'm going to foreclose that experience completely from my life. And I think, like, when people, I don't know, like, unfortunately excoriate the, this position, right, the kind of the position that I think we share here, in which we would say, like, having a family is a great thing. It really is. Yeah, it has its challenges. It's not always, like, running a home is not always great. My home is often more messy than not, right? But there's also, like, great moments of beauty and grace, and all of that. For people to, like, excoriate that position as one in which these Republicans just want,
Right.
to, like,
Yeah.
turn women into, like, baby making machines, and, it's like, just like, the servitude of women again. And it's just the old feminism, like, rearing its head, and, like, misunderstanding, really, what the phenomenon of maternity really is. And I think that that's precisely why we need, I think, a philosophy in the first case, to get a hold of this experience and understand it correctly. But yeah, I mean, theology does have the last word. But, first and foremost, I would say we need the philosophy. I mean, we need to understand this thing, and beginning with the epistemology and also the metaphysics of it. That's the urgent project. But you're right. There's definitely a very anti-natal push,
Yeah.
And I have no idea why people keep talking about population, overpopulation. I mean,
Yeah.
give me a break. Like, look at the world. I mean, we're going extinct.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
absolutely.
but that's going to be of dire consequence for, like, local populations. I mean, who's going to sustain, like, Japan's aging population?
Yeah. Or closer to home in Canada, it's a real issue. It's a real issue in Canada.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because in Canada, the stats are showing, and this isn't specific to, motherhood or children, but around marriage, that more and more Canadians are just choosing not to be married. And so you've got singles that are not pursuing committed relationships at all. You have people
Wow.
that were once married that are choosing not to get remarried. Or you've got people in serious relationship that will just stay in relationship but not actually, again, get married. And of course, that's impacting family and children,
Right.
and fewer couples are having children. I think the stat is that it's just over 80% of Canadians between 21 and 34 that have not been married.
Wow.
So, which is interesting.
80. Wow, that's a really high number.
Well, but it's
Yeah,
20-year-olds
yeah.
too, right? So
Yeah,
it goes
but
20 to 34,
still,
but yeah, up
all
to
the way to
34.
34.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a real thing. And you kind of hinted at this, but I want to just give you permission, because there could be people listening who have these thoughts, because this does not, people that are faith filled are not necessarily immune from thinking this way. And sadly, part of it is because maybe their own experience of family life has not been all that positive.
That's true.
And that's a real thing. But I mean, you kind of hinted at it, but as a mother, as a person of faith, like, why consider it? Make a case for traditional family of marriage and children. Why consider it?
Yeah, that's the question, right? I mean, if only you could tell like whole nations that are dying out.
Right.
Give them like 1 or 2 sentences, like, here's why you should do it, and this is like,
Yeah.
but I actually, Rousseau, the political philosopher, the Enlightenment philosopher Rousseau, has he has a number of things in Emile. He has this book about how to raise a child, given that he himself like didn't raise a child. He ran
Right.
away like when his I don't know, yeah. But he does say this, and that I think is probably right. He says, if a mother doesn't actually take time to raise her own daughter, one form of that would be like outsourcing the care completely, wet nursing it. That was very common back then. I mean, the mothers didn't even have a bond, that basic bond, of like nursing with their children. But then obviously, you have your various like, historical versions of daycare and whatever, like there's very little bond. He says, if a mother doesn't care to actually be a mother to her daughter, there's very little probability that the daughter will grow up to want to be a mother herself too. And I do wonder, I know this is very controversial to say, but there are different ways in which childcare gets outsourced. So I don't mean at all to be making a universal statement about this. I mean, my son, by the way, right now is with a babysitter, so I can talk to you,
Yeah.
I mean, when I hear women dropping off like I don't know, like how young is it now? It's like 8 weeks old or something. I mean, I've heard of that, right?
Yeah.
Because maternity leave, is whatever. I got to get back to work. And, they're dropping off like little babies for the whole day in some foreign environment in which the child has no bond with any of these people. And you bet like babies know like who's who, I mean, it's well documented that like babies even, they recognize the voice of dad. And then much more than that too, like they can tell like, whose milk is mom's, right? Like, I mean, because it has like the same scent, like in the amniotic fluid. And so there are all these like biological bonds that I think like we're kind of screwing up. And, I also wouldn't go so far as to say, oh, like if you're going to be a mom, like don't even think about working outside the home, and this kind of thing. But I actually wish that we could rethink the way we do work, the way that the workplace is structured, and kind of like akin to that comment that I got once at an Ivy League university.
Yeah.
Like this is not a child friendly environment. Well, why not, right? I mean, I'm not saying like the workplace, like especially if you need to have meetings with people over the age of 5, like I'm not saying that the hall should be filled with kids either, but there's some sense in which, make it easier for parents to fulfill their natural instincts, right? And like the natural instinct of any mom is to be close to her baby, especially, right?
Of course.
And it just breaks my heart when I hear stories of mothers dropping their babies off, at the daycare center when they're, 2 months old, and then just breaking down in the parking lot sobbing, for, before then like going off to work, right? And you one eventually gets used to that, but I do wonder, is there a kind of generational problem here in which like the bonds maybe have been lacking, and why are people these days all turning to polyamory? I don't know if you've seen this, the New York Times, and I don't know, there's like books coming out about people's polyamorous, I mean, what's wrong with us, right? It's as if like you said, like this kind of denial of a human commitment. Like they don't even want to commit, in marriage, much less to children, right? So, there's something gone wrong, I think, in, I don't know, like maybe it's a chemical thing, in the way that people are. I mean, this is also well documented that babies who, have largely grown up like in daycare centers where they basically don't have like a consistent caretaker that they know, have extremely high cortisol levels in the brain, meaning they're very stressed out. But what's very interesting about these babies is they don't show it at all. Like if you like held one of these babies, like they would just kind of look at you, they wouldn't cry. Why? Because they've learned not to cry.
Yeah.
They've learned not to ask for help. You know? And that's what we've done.
They've learned how to cope.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I think, I do wonder like what we've done over time, like with the sexual revolution, with the breakdown of the family and the kind of the natural instincts that we have. Yeah, I do see like among younger, I don't know, like people my age and in the like the younger generations, like a kind of return to attachment parenting. And that's very hopeful. Like I just think the science shows that attachment parenting, is what forms like healthy relationships. Like we shouldn't worry that children are too bonded to their moms, because eventually children are not going to be tethered to their moms, right? But it's very important for them to have a very healthy, stable, and confident bond with their parents.
Yeah, it's interesting you were talking about attachment, because I was actually going to ask you, I mean, when you say attachment, are you thinking like Gordon Neufeld attachment theory?
Maybe you're going to have to enlighten me about like what.
Well, I mean, essentially what it is, like we talk about, providing care and all that, which usually means keep the children safe. They're not in harm's way of problems, but that's not parenting. That's just keeping them safe. So attachment is the bonds that are necessary to be introduced to the world, for all the right things to happen, emotionally growth and all that kind of thing. So I'm glad you mentioned it, because it's not.
It's a more substantive form of attachment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, I mean, a very well-meaning friend, much older generation. Several people actually tried to discourage me from nursing our child, when he was as young as like 7-8 months. Okay. Like they would say things like, he doesn't need it anymore. And then this was very interesting. One of them said, it's just for comfort. To which I said like, but comfort, is something that babies need.
Absolutely.
They're not just animals. Yeah. They're not just wanting nutrition. Like they want, to be close to their mother's bodies. And, I mean, I kind of had to learn that. You do get like the societal pressure, to like prove that your child's going to be okay, like an okay, independent kind of unit in society.
Yeah, at 8 months of age.
But it's just like, it's like, just give it a break, or this like, the perennial question, like, is he sleeping through the night? Where does he sleep? Is he sleeping in a separate room? Because that's the standard, right? And it's like, look, babies do not need to sleep through the night. In fact, babies who do sleep through the night are more prone to SIDS.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's something about like the frequent arousal during the night. And like, as a mom, at first I was like, this is horrible. Like I'm getting woken up like every hour. And then I realized like my baby needs to do this in order for me to be reassured that he's still alive. Because I don't know, as a mom of a newborn, you're just like, is he still alive? Is he still alive?
Yeah.
Like during the night, right? And it's like, I'm glad that he does not sleep through the night. Just like meeting children at every point, like where they are. I know at the point where they're teenagers, you're just like, I'm sorry, I don't want to meet you where you are. But like, I mean, but that's hard. That's what being a parent is. It's like constantly, having the humility to adapt to the circumstance of this miracle of life, which is like constantly changing. I mean, that's a very deep philosophical question. Is like when you look at the biology of like an early embryo, like the change that it undergoes, it's like so transformational, like the early zygote. And it's amazing. It's just completely miraculous, right? The way in which like the cells know exactly, how to like become the human being or whatever animal actually it is meant to be. And when we keep that in mind, it's like, okay, our children are going to change.
Yeah.
People are going to change. Maybe our spouses too are like, this is a good life lesson for us, right? Spouses change too. And, like, how can I love my spouse, like in this moment of the season of his life? How can I love my husband more? How can I love my son, who's now like a kind of riotous 5-year-old, like running all over the place, like not the sweet little like bean that he used to be, as we used to call him, the way that, again, like, and this leads us to theology, is like God loves us no matter what too. And, we go through all sorts of vicissitudes in life. And especially as a convert. Like you're just like, I don't know why God loves me, but yeah, I mean, he does.
Yeah.
That makes it all the greater. So yeah, and I think parenthood is like that too.
Profound humility is required because of all the change, most of which we're not prepared for. Our oldest has 3 children of his own, so we're grandparents 3 times.
Oh, that's awesome.
And our youngest is 15, and just all the different things. I actually have to repent because, when you're parenting, I mean, it can be overwhelming. It is not an easy way. I mean, we had 8 kids, 4 of them very close together.
Wow.
You try to learn and you try to extract from all kinds of sources different wisdom that you need in the moment. And some of the things that we adopted in our family, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. But you're just searching for something to help with that. So Janice, we've got a little bit of time left, and I do want to explore something because I heard you give a presentation. I want to just give you freedom to speak on this, and it's totally different topic. So pardon the abrupt change here. And one of the reasons why I'm asking you is because I love my country of Canada. I love Canada. I really do.
Canada's great. Yeah.
Canada's great.
We have a number of colleagues and students. Yeah.
You would? Ave Maria is a destination for many. But we're probably sort of 25 years ahead, I would say, of the United States in many of the kind of different ideologies that have come in and, say wokeism, whatever, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
And in particular, things that are coming against free speech. And so I want to give you an opportunity to kind of differentiate, because the way that I see you describe free speech is that it's not freedom of expression. It's much deeper than that, more robust, more towards like debate, freedom of debate and conversation around ideas and all that. Yeah. If you could speak to that, the differences and why freedom of debate and ideas and all that is just so important. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. The occasion of this interview, actually, it was a good occasion actually for me to think about the link between my work on motherhood and my work on free speech, which I would say this. I mean, I think, again, the underlying thesis is, what is it that makes us human in particular, as distinguished from other animals? And this actually was a question that the ancient philosopher Aristotle tackled in his Politics, and then Aquinas in his commentary on Aristotle, brings out a lot of like the interesting distinctions here, particularly in the way that we express ourselves. So, animals, Aristotle notices, even back in his day, there are many animals that he calls them gregarious, which actually, for us, gregarious has this connotation of like being very chattery. But the Greek, fascinatingly, of gregarious comes from agaleon, which means herding. So any kind of animal that congregates, you could say socially, we are classed as that kind of animal too, that we like to come together. This bring me back, give me PTSD, from like my Protestant days. But I was like, why are we doing this? Now I get it. Okay, I like going to mass. Okay, but yeah, I mean, there's some sense in which we need to be able to distinguish our form of human, distinctly, uniquely human expression from the kind of animal vocalizations that you see in honeybees or wolves or orca. Like, name your social animal, that like likes to talk to one another. Like dogs definitely communicate, sometimes even with us, right? So there's no doubt that there is such a thing as expression, but what makes us particularly human is this philosophical concept that Aquinas calls locutio. And so locutio is, we would translate this as reasonable discourse. I mean, so you mentioned debate. People have this connotation of debate as being confrontational. I think it can be, and I don't mind a confrontation myself. Like I actually enjoy, the back and forth of debate. But, the essence of discourse seems to be the particular way in which we are able to ask questions. And this is what makes us really uniquely and powerfully human, like the rational or the reasoning animal among other animals, among other social animals. We're not just social, but this is precisely what makes us political, Aristotle and Aquinas say. And by that, they mean, able to live together, to congregate in a very particular way, right? And in particularly the way in which we congregate and think about the way that we congregate. We think about what would be just or unjust in the way that we are together, in the actions that we do together. I mean, this is what constitutions are made of. We don't just like get together and like drink at the watering hole. We, technologize, like we strategize. And we also ask questions like, how just or unjust is it to make water universally accessible, say, to humanity, right? So like these are like moral questions that animals are not able to answer. I mean, clearly, like when you look at the water holes in which like basically it's like fisticuffs and slaughter,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think like I'm always interested in these issues of like the way in which are the non-rational part of us, because we also express things non-rationally. I actually think musical expression is non-rational.
Mm.
Instrumental music is a great example of this. A less edifying example would be like expletives, which political philosophers talk about, But like these are both examples of vocalization that is unique to us as humans, but are not translatable immediately into discourse. Like when
Mm.
I'm playing like a Schubert sonata or like a Mozart piano concerto or something, I'm not trying to make an argument. I'm not raising questions. There are moments in music where you can kind of hear a question. It's like the tone of it
Mm.
sounds as if the composer is kind of raising a question and then there's an answer. So there is that kind of, but that's more in the kind of the tone and the timbre, the suggestiveness of the music and the expressiveness. Nonetheless, I think, what I'm trying to argue is that this kind of, what Aquinas calls vox, which is the animal kind of vocalization, and we employ that too. For us, that should prompt locutio. Like vox should always lead to conversation. And this is what makes us great, is that we don't just play music, like we can talk about it. Or I don't know, like some people would say, I don't want that. I just want to like listen to it. The way some people say, I just want to like drink my wine. I don't want to talk about it or think about it. What makes us uniquely rational is the fact that we can taste the wine and that we can. So,
Mm.
I mean, full disclosure, like my husband and I, it's like a hobby of ours that we do wine tasting a lot. But I think this is something very deeply human too, that we don't just consume food and drink. Like we can think about it and we can discourse about it. We can raise questions about it. So yeah, there's this kind of interaction between the non-rational and the rational that I find very fascinating, because it turns out you kind of need both. Like our world would be barren, right? Like without
Mm.
music, for instance. I mean, I can do without expletives, but like I couldn't do without music. And there's all sorts of like artistic forms that do not in themselves count as discourse, but are wondrous to us. But having said all this, it simply means that we do want to make a distinction between what makes us uniquely human, right? And like when someone like simply puts a claim out there or like puts something on a billboard or
Mm.
like assembles like for the sake of political protest without trying to give arguments,
Yeah.
like I do think this is like less efficacious. It should be, we should see this as kind of a display of our impotence in the reasoning like sort of category, right? Something's gone wrong if instead of talking to one another and being willing to entertain, substantive questions. Like I take it in Canada, you can't even ask the question, is a gay relationship morally illicit? Like you can't even ask that question. That's a terrible loss.
Yeah.
I think to like human life. If we can't even ask questions like sincerely and good faith,
Mm-hmm.
even if you think you already know the answers to that question, to be able to have a discourse about it and to see the arguments for and against and
Yeah.
then and then draw your own conclusion, is the unique strength of human animals, I would say, like human beings, that we can do that.
Well, what's interesting, Janice, is that, I mean, the situation that came to mind when I asked the question of you thinking about my country, and I don't know if you're familiar with this or where it's at in the United States, but is conversion therapy.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So, whereby, if a person presents in a context of a professional psychological relationship that they are transgendered or that they're gay or, whatever, you cannot even ask questions that might go against that, which of course any professional would want to ask genuine, inquiry, but it is not allowed. So that's like a really kind of extreme example.
That's crazy. I mean, yeah, it's just we've reached like a point of absurdity past which I
Yeah.
just think like, like look at the rest of the world, and like what's happening in the Middle East. Like I just think I
Yeah.
just think like we've become so absurdly like sort of closeted within our own minds about this that something's gonna happen. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I think back actually on my own experience because I wasn't your typical like feminine girly girl. I guess like my parents always called me like a tomboy or whatever it was like women were called back then. I like sports. Like I didn't dress in frilly dresses. Like I actually like kind of preferred like my brother's clothes a little bit, and I think like if I lived today, like someone might say, look, like if you like boys clothing, like you should try this, you should get like transitioned, into like the other gender. And, that's just ridiculous, right? It's like, well, look, I mean, this is where, we do want a better understanding. There's actually not much to say about this, about gender and gender identity, besides that, there are like little accidental things that are just like really silly for us to fix on. And one of them is clothing, like as if like the way a person dresses. Okay, no, I'm not saying this totally doesn't matter, because of course we have like there's a function of this within our society that matters to us, like how someone is presenting themselves. But like if like a 12-year-old girl is like just like, I don't know, like I don't want to wear like the pink frilly stuff, right? Like that doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? It just means she's like a teenage girl, right, who's kind of exploring like philosophy and like getting into music and like doing like maybe like you're not non-conventional. I wasn't interested in makeup and like fashion and any of that, so but that's neither here nor there. It's just an accident of what it means to be a woman, which I think Edith Stein is right. It's like centered on this power, of like our very different procreative roles that men and women play. And therefore there is a difference in the way that we have relationships. Like the way our whole Edith Stein thought like the whole like soul body arrangement was, well, not the whole arrangement, but just like the strength of the unity of it was a little bit different from men to women. She thought that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there are these differences, and like, who cares? Like the way someone presents, I mean, on a certain level, it does matter, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of crazy, like where things have gone.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy that we're even talking about it, knowing what is out there. That's nuts. Janice, we've come to the end of our time, but I want to just see what is sort of on your horizon. Are you currently writing a book? Is there something coming out soon?
Yeah, I have a few pieces coming out. One of them is on this Aristotelian Thomistic distinction between forms of expression and the form of expression that I would say we should absolutely protect, which is reasonable discourse. So that's coming out as an article in a Cambridge University press volume. But I am writing a book on the subject that hopefully in the next year or two is going to be coming out as well. And I'm always writing pieces on the unity of body and soul and the metaphysics of life. Eventually, right, drawing a connection here to motherhood too. So yeah, all of these things, I do try to post them on my website. Yeah, it's just fun. It's fun to think and write, and I'm grateful to have conversations with interesting folks like yourself. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Janice. Thanks. And the website? It's just your name, I believe, right?
Yeah, www.janicechick.com.
There you go. Thank you. Maybe you can use some Canadian examples in the book that's coming out on freedom of expression. That would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Can I advocate for that, please?
Yeah, please. Yeah, we'll send them my way. Yeah, I'm always interested. Yeah, I follow more the U.S. constitutional scene, but
of course.
Yeah, the Canadian scene is probably rife with interesting free speech cases.
There's a lot there. Janice, thank you very much. I really do appreciate this. I'm sure this has been encouraging for our listeners. So thanks for taking the time.